Hey, Brooke here. Before we get into this week's episode, we want to invite you into something fun and unique. If Intentional has helped you, blessed you, or impacted your life in any way, would you take a minute to let us know about it? We would love to know how this ministry is impacting, changing, and shaping your life. So here's all you need to do. Sit down, take a 1-minute selfie-style video, and simply submit that to info@intentionalparents.org by November 13th, 2024. We would love to use this content in future episodes and share what some of your experience has been like with other people. So if you have a minute, do that now, and thank you for joining us on this fun idea and journey. You're listening to the Intentional Parents Podcast, brought to you by Intentional. Intentional is all about spiritual formation in the family. We desire to bring biblical hope and practical help. Enjoy this week's conversation. All right, welcome back to the Intentional Parents Podcast. Thank you to everybody who has been following along this journey. Thank you to everyone that's been coming to some of our live events. This week, I'm excited because last week Elizabeth was not on, but this week she is. And so welcome, Elizabeth, and bye, Phil. So we replaced you both.
Lost one, gained one.
Lost one. And also, this is a great note to mention. If you want to watch these episodes, go over to YouTube. And you can see that we are all very unintentionally wearing black, pretty much.
We certainly are.
Yeah, so that's just what it is right now. So you can watch all these episodes. And thank you to everyone who's rated and subscribed and taken time to do that. That means the world. If you haven't had a chance, take 5 seconds, do that. That's so helpful. It means a ton to us. Diane, you were recently reading, before I have you share that verse, we want to talk about this idea of mountains today. Now, I know that sounds so weird, and we'll get into the why. Of what that really is.
By the way, have you seen the mountains since it just turned a little bit cold? And they're covered in snow again.
Yes, we live in this place, Bend, Oregon, everybody, if you want to come visit. We had some people visit yesterday. I'm blanking on their names right now, but we bumped into them after church, and that doesn't probably feel very kind to you that I'm not remembering your name currently, but it's a beautiful spot. And yeah, there's this time of year where summer, all the snow melts off the mountains, and the mountains are really close. You know, physically they feel really close. You can see them all. And yeah, there's this time of year where all of a sudden they go from just brown to beautiful white.
Beautiful snow.
And you can see them from your house.
Oh, yeah.
You have a huge,
the sunset last night over those mountains was just so beautiful. You know, it turns all that snow kind of a coral color. It's just beautiful. Yeah.
I love that. I love it. So,
mountains.
Yes, mountains. That reminds me, why don't we just mention it? Because we're talking about it. But the marriage retreat, we're going to be doing that. Can't wait. We talked about that.
If you want to come see those mountains.
Yes, you can.
Come
and there'll
to the
still be
retreat.
snow on them in May.
Yeah, in May. Yeah, it doesn't usually
yeah.
fully go away, even throughout the whole year. But yeah, check out link in the show notes. We talked about that last time, but we're going to be doing some of our first marriage retreats to launch the marriage arm of Intentional, and really begin to just pour into marriages, because we know so many folks like ourselves need the help in so many different ways. And these are going to be, as was already mentioned before, but these are going to be experiences that we all get away. There's going to be space not only for times of teaching, but it's not going to be overloaded. The schedule is open, and we have some sessions, but they're not going to be crazy long. It's a time for you to be refreshed and encouraged. And are you sleepy? Are you tired as I'm even telling you this? You're like,
yeah.
That sounds
I could
really
use
good.
some refreshment right now.
I know. And we're sitting far away from each other, not because we're in an argument.
That's right.
So I'd like to highlight.
Between you.
Yeah. The mother-in-law's in between us. Okay, so we want to talk about this idea of where our culture is, and we're going to get to why we're talking about mountains. Let's talk about what culture is kind of expecting from a lot of people who might be in the age and stage that are listening. A lot of people that listen to and follow along with Intentional's work are primarily between the ages of 20 and 40. And then we do have a growing community of wise beyond their years, I call them, community of like 50 plus, which I think is amazing. Mm-hmm. That said, there's a cultural thing going around right now, especially with both moms and dads, mothers and fathers, men and women. But examples are like you're supposed to be an entrepreneur, and you're supposed to be a full-time mom, and you're supposed to have a full-time job, and you need to have everything just dialed and in place, really usually at the sacrifice of yourself. You can feel free to add,
well, I think
ladies.
more than even just a full-time job. this pressure to be building something successful and amazing, or to be doing something successful and amazing, and that doing the faithful day in, day out, unseen work has probably always been that. No, I'm going to recant that. Not always been uncelebrated. I think that was for a very long time very normal
And recognized.
to do very, not even mundane, but just do the things that kept you and your family alive. And that was celebrated.
Yeah.
But that's not celebrated in our culture
Not the same
anymore.
ways. Well, and there's pressure. Lots of pressure.
Yeah. And obviously we all know all of the hundreds of reasons why that is true. But I think it affects mothers and fathers and just any human alive.
Can I speak for men?
Yeah.
The pressure, I'm speaking just for all of men now, apparently.
Yeah.
But men who are like like 29 to 35, and they're like, I've got to do, like, I haven't made it in my career yet. I've got to do this. I'm running out of time. How many people listen to the lie that I'm running out of time? And anybody that is listening to that lie, like, you can know that that is not from God. That is so from the enemy to put pressure on you to make you feel like you're running out of time because you haven't become something that you think you're supposed to be yet, is categorically wrong. Like, it takes so much time to become anything, rather just let alone a normal, functioning, healthy human. But I talk to a lot of those guys who feel the pressure to be somewhere where they're not even trained or ready to be in. So you have that pressure. I think men feel that pressure a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a very real pressure. I don't think we felt it to the same degree a generation ago because we didn't have social media to compare ourselves to anybody. We only compared ourselves really to our immediate friends and family and culture. And that was enough pressure there. But now with social media, we're seeing people's success constantly, or at least a version of the success. Yeah.
I was thinking of, sorry to cut you off. I was thinking of money. We all feel like we're supposed to make a lot of money so we can have all the experiences that we see everyone else have. So there's this pressure to overwork in a deep way, usually at the expense of your own sanity, usually at the expense of your family as well. A lot of the time that these are the things that bring happiness. And so we want to talk about this idea of mountains, and mountains not as in the sense of go climb a mountain, although if you are a mountain climber, go ahead, like, please do. But we're talking about these moments in life. There's times when we have mountains that we're supposed to climb. There's some mountains we're supposed to, like, ignore. There's certain mountains that are dangerous for us to go upon. And we want to talk about how there's a time to be involved in these different stages of mountains. Some people have the mountain of suffering. Some people have the mountain of grief or loss, the mountain of loss. And what do you do when you're just staring at this mountain of loss all day? And we were just talking a little bit. We're going to do another episode soon about these different ideas of complaining and lament and stuff like that. But there's a mountain of grief.
Or divorce. Like that. That's a mountain in and of itself.
Mountain.
Yeah. And just the idea of everything we just talked about and seeing in culture, we see such a different narrative in the scriptures that is so different than what we're seeing in culture, that, to lose our life, then we will find it. Like, that's not what's happening in culture.
No,
go find your life, go find your success, go, versus the way of Jesus of laying down our life to serve others. And what does that actually look like? And where does calling fit into that? And those times when it is time to climb the mountain and the time when it's not. And I think we need a lot of help and guidance discerning that in a culture that just is like, go do it. Manifest your success.
Boss.
That is the air we breathe. Yeah. And it influences all of us, even if we don't want it to, or we don't think it does. It is kind of in the air that we breathe.
And really the way of following Jesus, which is the path that we have chosen, is so different than the way of the world. You can't look really negatively on the way of the world because they're following their own satisfaction and fulfillment and all the expectations that go with it. But we're called to be different. We're following the way of Jesus, and he has a path for each of us that he assures us that he will show us. But he seems to show it mostly one step at a time.
Yeah.
So I
Take us there.
was reading the Bible the other day, kind of bringing my own following to the Lord in scriptures and just saying, okay, so what next? What am I free now to pour myself into this next thing that I'm hoping that I get to do? And just really sitting before him. And I felt like he led me to Deuteronomy chapter 1. I like the book of Deuteronomy because it kind of sums up the first several books of the Bible. And it's very story oriented. And it feels very personal too. And I came to Deuteronomy 1, verse 6. And it's the Lord our God speaking to his people. And he spoke to us in Horeb, he's saying, and he says, this is what God says, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. In verse 7, turn and set out on your journey and go to the hill country. And he gives them some really explicit steps. In verse 8, see, I have placed the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land which the Lord swore to give your fathers. And then he goes on and gives more details of the plan. But it just jumped off the page to me, reminding me again, number one, I am a follower of Jesus. And I want to live led by the Spirit of God. And that here he is giving us an example of his way with his people, of where he decides when it's time, when we've stayed long enough in one spot. In this case, the context of it was that they had been rescued from slavery. All they knew was slavery, so they had a slave mentality. And then God brought them through Exodus, freed them in miraculous ways, so they got to see his power. Then the next book is setting up how I want to be worshiped. This is Leviticus is all about worship, how you come to know me and be intimate with me. And then Numbers is really hard for us to read through because it's a bunch of laws and rules and seemingly really hard to understand things like don't boil a lamb in the milk of its mother. Just
these are important life
oddities.
hacks, really.
But really he's setting up, this is the way you be clean, free of disease. This is the way you be holy, set aside people. These had been slaves, so they'd known only degradation. And he's setting them up to be God's chosen people. Then we come to Deuteronomy 1. Now, you stayed now long enough in this place of waiting and learning and listening to me. Now I'm leading you to this promised land.
Yes.
So, and then we all started talking about it, and it just seems to have some real applications to even patterns. I mean, looking back at 50 years ago is when I first heard the gospel, first gave my life to Jesus, knew nothing about how to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And just the long road of him showing himself faithful to Phil and I over and over again in leading us. And not too few, several times where we got ahead of him, where we wanted something. And so we went after it only to have it kind of collapse. We weren't ready for that we thought we wanted right now. So it seems to us that there are some really good lessons to be, especially in this culture, with this strong emphasis on achieve and achieve now, that we can learn from this.
We have something really exciting we want to share with you. For many years, we've gotten questions like, how do I stay married in this moment? Or what do I do with the troubling nature and reality of my marriage? How do I love my spouse well? How do they love me well? How do we take all of our past and present and bring it together in a healthy way that not only glorifies Jesus, but blesses us and blesses our family? These are great questions, and we've heard you. Here at Intentional, we are excited to announce that we're going to be launching Intentional Marriage. We are wanting to help couples all around the world in their journey of being married. And we want to help them not only just grow, but thrive and even flourish. So here's how we're going to start this. Starting May 2025, we're going to have 2 different weekends away out here in Bend, Oregon at Brasada Ranch. And these are 2 different weekends for couples to get away, sit under the teachings of the scripture, to be refreshed, encouraged, and to hopefully go back into the real world every day with new tools, new resources, and skills to really love each other well. We know that marriage is hard. We also know that it's beautiful, and we know it's a gift. So we want to start the process of helping marriages all around the world, and we're going to start with these retreats. So here's all you need to do. Click the link in the show notes, or simply go over to intentionalparents.org, click on Marriage Retreat, sign up, and we can't wait to see you there. Here's to all the future and current marriages. We are so happy to be on this journey with you. Well, I think as Elizabeth said, and Diane, you said, the Bible's a very different narrative. It's a very different pace. The ways of Jesus, I think they're timeless, but they're also something that we have to bring into the moment and help weigh against the cultural moment that we're in, and help us see things as they really are. Because if you jump on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, any of them, you're going to have a bunch of people saying, you're too late. It's already over.
Yeah.
Do you know all the statistics about why no one's going to remember you in 2 generations? Do you know why no one cares about your situation right now? Also, do you know how to make $1 million this week? The amount of stuff is just overwhelming. And so I think it's just important to highlight what is true. Let's come back to not what is like a fad, a timeless fad, but what is timeless truth, and what does Jesus say? And then really, what does life actually look like from lived experience? Because I think that's the other part of this, is that what life actually looks like is usually very slow. Changes happen slow over time. They're never quick. Usually, depending upon the situation. And it's just a long, crazy road sometimes. And so I think what might help, we're going to talk about 4 different times. There's a time to, like, as they said, there's a time to like look at the mountain. Maybe there's a time to walk away from the mountain, release the mountain. So we're going to talk about 4 different structures, but maybe to start a story. Did you have a verse or anything before we were going?
I was trying to decide if I was going to interject or not.
Okay. So you can,
Go ahead.
You choose.
Well, just you were just re-highlighting what we're seeing versus what we see in the scriptures. And just all of this, none of this is new. None of the enemy's tactics of distraction and pulling us away from what God's heart is for us is new. All the way back in the garden, before the fall, we see Adam and Eve just receiving from God everything that he has given them. He's provided for them food and no need for clothing because they're naked and unashamed. He provided companionship. He provided them each other and a way to have a family. And he provided work for them to do, meaningful work for them to tend the garden, to partner with him in his creation. They're working with God. Beautiful. And then we all know the story. When Eve is deceived by the serpent, she's after good things. It says that when she saw the fruit, that it was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's what the enemy said, like, God's just keeping these things from you. If you eat it, your eyes will be opened. So good things that she was desiring, but then it says she took some and ate it, from receiving to taking. And that's what we're talking about, is that the thing that got Eve, the thing that is now in all of us because of how the enemy deceived her, is this wrestling that we have to wrestle with of, am I just trying to take the next season or the next job or the next avenue of influence or whatever it might be for you? I think we're all prone to different areas of trying to take. But I think it's this, how do we fight against that? It doesn't mean that we're passive and do nothing, because that is a whole, and we're going to talk about that. That's a whole other thing that can happen where we say, well, someday I'll get to the thing I think God might be asking me to do. Someday, and someday never comes. That's a propensity too, to be passive. But to live in this place of receiving from God, being led, where is it actually time for me to act? Where is it time for me to just receive what it is do you want to teach me right now?
Love it.
Yeah, I think that's really rich and really good, from receiving to taking. And we're in a take-it-all culture now. And it's unfortunately leaked into our conversation and the pressure we feel as Christians.
And I think it bleeds so easily into our parenting right now
Oh,
because we have all of this knowledge, quote unquote, around us. We have so much information that we can feel. There's all the funny things that going, speaking of social media, around social media of like parents in the 80s and what they were just expected to clothe their children, make sure they had something to eat and send them outside. And now it's like every mother is supposed to be the psychologist, the doctor, the psychiatrist, the nutritionist, we're responsible for every bit of their mental health and physical health and all of, like, it's overwhelming.
While we're having to work more than ever before.
Yes. No one person can do that.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And,
And then you add on top of that opportunity. That's what I hear all the time. I want to give my child every opportunity.
Yes.
And they just run the whole family ragged doing a bunch of things.
I don't want to give my kids every opportunity. I'd like to give them an amount that's good for them and for us.
Yes.
You know, the other day we were talking to, what would she technically be? The gal we were meeting with.
A behavioral therapist.
A behavioral therapist.
For non-neurotypical kids.
I'll just give you this one line. And it doesn't really necessarily have to do with it, but it is so helpful with every parenting because our kids always talk about fair. That's not fair. You know what we're talking about? Everyone's always like, well, they have a snack, so that means I get a snack. Or they got to go do this, so I get to go do this. And she simply said this line. She's like, okay, well, just start using this with your kids. So I pass this along to everyone listening. She said, fair does not mean everyone gets everything equal. Fair specifically is what every person needs for their brain and their body to function well. So it's not about you getting the same.
It's not about equal.
It's not equal. It's about fair is whatever is good for that person's body and brain. I thought that was really interesting to think about.
Really good.
Like, so some kids don't need a snack. Some kids do. Some kids need an experience. Some don't, you know? Yeah. And it's them getting what they need for their situation. So anyway, that's just an interesting dynamic. But as we're talking about this, I think a way to maybe bridge this and talk about the different mountains that we're going to discuss and the different times, I think we have to talk about, well, actually, I think we should share a story. I think does that make sense? Let's do a story. I think for Elizabeth and I think life has gone on all sorts of different trajectories than we expected, including being a part of Intentional. This was like not on our radar at all. I was talking to a friend today, and he was asking some questions like, how did you even end up in this? And I was like, oh, and he's a new friend. And I was explaining, I was like, oh, this was not like the plan. This wasn't like, oh, I got this idea. And so we have been on this trajectory of, obedience each step of the way. And next thing, take the next step. And so originally, church background, church ministry has been our world. We've grown up as pastors, and as a career, so to speak, I've been in pastoral vocational ministry for 18 years. And that was our world. Church, Sunday in, Sunday out, every single week, midweek, sometimes multiple times midweek. I remember in the height of when we helped you guys plant Solid Rock and Bridgetown, all those churches, it was like sometimes 6 gatherings on a weekend.
Yeah. Yes.
2 Saturday nights, 4 Sunday, like
one Friday.
It was so.
Yeah, you were out 4 nights a week when Duke was born.
I remember.
Not just out, like full-on church services.
Full on gone. And it was beautiful to be a part of. It was also like, this is crazy. So this is our background. And this is the world we grew up in many ways, in the sense of ministry and career. And so we were actually, before Intentional, we were on our way to plant a church. And we were actually praying through specifically planting a church in Seattle or New York. These are 2 cities that landed on our heart. And then
weren't you specifically looking at urban church planting?
Yeah. Yes. And that was, and by the way, Bend is not an urban area, if anyone wants to. Everything has changed a lot, is all to say. But not for the worse, for the better. But that said, we were on this trajectory. Our sweet little birdie was born during this time of praying and planning. And then she got really sick. She got something called infantile spasms. We talked about this in many episodes, but you can check some last episodes for that. But this catastrophic form of epilepsy that left her now all of a sudden with long-term permanent brain damage. And then we're seeing now all of a sudden we have a little one with special needs, and her being 4 years removed from the next sibling, we're thinking her being the youngest with special needs, I don't know if that's going to be the best for her or our family. So we really had this sense like that we were supposed to. I remember like it wasn't just like, oh, we should have another one. We felt almost this responsibility for Bird and for the development of our family to have another one. So we decide to have another one. So now we have 4 kids, one with special needs, and we're supposed to go plant an urban church in one of these crazy cities. And quickly just started to realize, no, like this isn't going to happen. And feel free to jump in at any point.
Well, I think an important part is we had made a major move with that being the plan, made a major move back to Portland before she got sick.
Yeah, we were in Los Angeles, we moved back
with
to
a
Portland.
whole, everything was mapped out. We knew what the next couple of years were going to look like, and then we were going to be sent out. And it was a month after we moved. We had like just finished unpacking, basically, that she got sick.
I remember.
So it wasn't just a like, we hope to do this someday. It was like, looked like God setting us on this trajectory, this path, this thing that's been growing in our hearts.
Well, I think you should share the rest. You should share the rest of the story. You actually shared some of this story at the motherhood retreat. So if you were there, you'll maybe reference it a little bit. But yeah, you should just share the rest of it.
Well, for me, I remember it so distinctly. Sloan, our 4th, was like a couple weeks old, and we were beginning to have serious conversations. We were kind of at the place in the timeline. We'd kind of slowed things down after Bertie's diagnosis, but we were kind of at the place in our timeline that we needed to start moving towards this, or we needed to figure something out. And we kind of started to move towards like just investigating more, like, okay, where would we go? When would we go? And I just remember this like doom and gloom feeling of, oh my gosh, I don't think that we can do this. I don't think my exact words were, I don't feel like our family can sustain this. And definitely not now, maybe not ever. And just this moment of I think coming to reality of, wow, everything I thought was going to happen, it's not going to happen, which means I have no idea what we're supposed to do next. And then knowing how much, Brooke, you had been just wrestling with all of that and how much you wanted to go plant a church. And just seeing the devastation as you started to realize, like this is not going to be, like maybe everything I thought God was leading us to do, did I hear wrong? Was it not right? Is it like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
A lot of confusion.
A lot of confusion. At the same time, I found this book, really deep title. It's called Prayer by Richard Foster. And he goes through, it's one of my favorite books still to this day. And it's so rich, simplest title, but deepest of books. And it basically just talks about all these different types of prayer practices through the ages. And one of them was this one I hadn't really heard of called the prayer of relinquishment. And there's a lot of different ideas, but to sum it up from what I took from that chapter, not to take it meaning like I just summarized my own, but the part of it that I picked up the most, that stuck with me the most, was the fact that you take the thing that is your dream, your hope. So think about wherever you're at right now. Maybe this is a dream of your marriage, your children, your future, your job. Maybe this is with loss. I'm not sure. But the idea is that you take that dream or whatever it is that you're hoping for, and you basically visualize it in your hands. Like just try to, find a quiet place and visualize this in your hand. And the idea is that you basically visualize a grave and visualize yourself putting this thing, this dream or multiple dreams, whatever they are, into the grave, and then visualize yourself burying all of them all the way until the hole is filled. And the idea is that you then open your hands and just say, Father, now resurrect whatever is from you. And I remember what Richard Foster said in that book anyway. He just clearly said, there's going to be certain things that are resurrected that you totally assumed. Like, of course that one's coming back. Like, I knew that was always a part of what I was supposed to do or my call or what I was meant to be or my life situation. But then he said, at the very same time, there's going to be certain things that you were just sure of were going to be resurrected that will stay in the ground. And then there's going to be these other beautiful things that you never expected to emerge that begin to emerge. And I could not be more, it could not have been more accurate for what actually happened. Because I remember having to go on prayer walks just around our block, like prayer after walk, after prayer walk, after prayer walk, just to process like the death of dreams. Like this mountain was a huge part of our life. And it was like everything that you had prepared us for to this point really seemed so clear. And not only so clear, we moved back from Los Angeles because we had all the logistics covered. There was a whole entity in church and everybody with personnel and money and energy, like ready to launch us with all the things to make us as successful as we could be, to make sure the logistics are taken care of. And I just remember over and over feeling like, wow, this is dead. I don't know how to process that fully. And so that mountain had to change and I had to look away. And we'll talk about more of the four things in just a second. But for us, it was really painful, took a really long time. And I would say it's taken probably almost a full 8 years to see what God was actually up to in that moment. 8 years. So I don't know where you're at and what your timeline is. That's way longer than I expected by like 8 years. And so I think, wherever you're at, God's timing is so much different. We didn't see it. Looking back, hindsight is always so much clearer, but looking back, we actually say, this is beautiful. There's so much of it that is beautiful. Yeah. We so much prefer it vocationally. We feel not only do we blessed that we get to do this together, but that also there's just, it's just so fun to interact with so many people and get to help so many people. So we've been just honored to go on that journey, but it was like, we just want to take all the glamour out of it. It wasn't glamorous. It was like long and it's been painful and really confusing and years of us going like, is this really it? Is this and it wasn't like all of a sudden we made this switch from church planting to jumping on board with Intentional and working halftime out of church. Like that wasn't an easy, like fun thing. It was like they were both, the church was fairly new that we jumped on the team with. And then Intentional was still just trying to figure out what it was becoming. And so these were two kind of unsure things, at least at the time, that I didn't even know.
We were adamant we didn't want to move.
We didn't want to move, but the one requirement was like, we need to move if we're going to do that. So anyway, long story short, I'm not sure where your mountain is and what your timelines are, but there's a time for all this stuff. So we want to go through what these four are, and we'll talk about each one. But the first one, and we see it from the scriptures, you have stayed long enough on this at this mountain, that phrase. And there's a time of waiting. The first thing that you is that how you connected
That's
it?
how I saw it. Yeah, a time of waiting.
A time to stay.
And yes.
Yeah, which is what they had been doing prior to why it says you've stayed long enough. Yeah. Infers the fact that they had been waiting
a long time. Yes. In the and they were in the wilderness. So they escaped Egypt, and then they were kind of stuck in this desert place in front of this big mountain where they were given all these instructions and stuff, but they were camping. Yeah. So they, at least in Egypt, they had brick houses. Yeah. But here they were camping. And so they were camping for a long time. I would be very curious to look back and see how long a period of that time was. But
well, I think maybe to highlight though, there are seasons of waiting, and no matter where you're at right now,
and things happen there.
Yes.
Yeah. Important things happen in the waiting, but we're mostly unaware of them, don't you think? We just mostly feel itchy.
Itchy, that's a great word. Yes, we feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think it's where the enemy lies like crazy in trying to get us to believe that it's wasted time.
Yes.
And I think the waiting seasons are more valuable than the doing seasons.
Okay, so what happens in the waiting? What did you guys see happen in your lives in the waiting that maybe prepared you for this mountain or for to set out on this journey in the promised land?
Yeah. I would say it really, really ripped me. I won't speak for you. I'm sure it probably did for you too, but it ripped me of entitlement. I think there's this entitlement, like things are supposed to go pretty well because I serve you, Father. Like that. So it ripped of entitlement. Was given the gift of perspective that life, although we really do want it to work a certain way and it's not terrible, it never fully goes the way we want at all. And the perspective of the fact that that's more normal than not. Yeah. So this assumption that your life is always going to have this certain cadence and blessing and beauty to it, that's a gift to be able to see that. I think the waiting gives you the gift of seeing reality as it truly is. I think prayer anchors us to reality. Yeah. So having all that time to have to get to, I mean, at the time it felt like I have to, because it was like a way to keep sane. Waiting. Yeah, it was like prayer anchors you to reality. So I had to embrace the reality that my family could not go on the journey that I wanted to take them on. Yeah. And the journey that I felt I was called to. And it wasn't just me, it was our family, it was Elizabeth and I. I didn't marry a woman who's like, I'm happy to be behind the scenes. And she is happy to be behind the scenes, but that's not what it was. Like, she's gifted. She has her own calling.
Yeah.
It was just very clear, like, her calling was also built into this. And so when all of a sudden that was ripped away, I think the waiting gives you the gift of being in touch with reality, which then gives you the ability to have peace truly in what your circumstances actually are. Because there's so often we're just trying to fight reality by numbing out, by not accepting it, by just kind of pushing off all those weird feelings. I think there's a time to wait and have to sit in all the beauty, the pain, the confusion of the moment.
And
Yeah.
I think relinquishment is part of that too. Like in those waiting times, you're relinquishing what you, like you said, the opposite of entitlement is probably surrender or relinquishment. And those are, seems to me like when my kids were little, they used to watch Knight Rider. Remember that? And the car would do this. They push this button on the car and it would do a turbo boost.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we used to always turbo boost around our house. But I feel like the relinquishment, the uncomfortableness of waiting that leads to finally a relinquishment or a surrender is like a turbo boost in your dependence on God, and therefore your usability by God and your readiness to receive some of these great blessings that might be ahead that you would otherwise maybe grab a hold of for yourself instead of being generous with. But it seems like relinquishment is key in those moments. And a lot of the tension, I think, of the waiting is the tension leading up to full surrender and full relinquishment.
Yeah. I wonder for you, what was the waiting, what the waiting teach you?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind was entitlement. I'm glad you said that. Things you don't even realize that you feel are owed.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have been able to see prior to that. And then I think the relinquishment and acceptance, like learning to accept your life as it actually is. And especially when it's long seasons like that, to be able to ask, like, am I okay if this is it?
Yeah.
If there isn't some big thing that this is building towards, or this, like, am I okay with doing the day in, day out things that God is clearly asking me to do right now?
Yeah.
I think is huge. And I look now for us in very specifically what God had for us that we couldn't see. I think had we not gone through everything we did with our daughter, all of those years, because there's so much more to those 8 years that we're not sharing here. So much more in Brooke's own personal story and family of origin, and just so much. Your dad died in that time. Like, just there's a ton there.
Yeah.
And I look at, if I had been doing anything like what we're doing right now 10 years ago,
Gosh.
I would have had great intentions and would have very unintentionally been incredibly unhelpful to people and put...
So
I
much
would have,
pressure.
like, the Pharisees, it talks about they put, what is it? They put, like,
yes.
what is the word used in the scriptures of what they put around people's
Yoke?
necks? It's not yokes. I think it doesn't say like millstones or something.
Sure.
I should study that
No,
more.
that's yeah. But burdens on their back.
That they were putting burdens on people's backs.
Yeah.
That would have been me, totally unintentionally, unknowingly.
Yeah.
In all of
Very,
my ideals of, like, do these things and these will be the outcomes
I
that you
love
have.
prescriptive
Very
parenting. It doesn't
prescriptive.
work, though.
Yeah.
FYI, it does not work.
And I can see how easily that would have been my tone.
Sure.
And I think it took everything blowing up, not going according to plan, our family looking very different than we thought it was going to, to, I think, soften me to the reality of most people's lived stories and experiences.
Yeah.
And so I have deep gratitude for it now, that our life keeps us very in touch with the hardness of life as a whole.
Oh, it keeps us so humble. Forced humility.
Yeah. And the
not desired all the
formation,
time.
the spiritual formation, the character formation that happens in those prolonged seasons, when those seasons aren't quick, when they're grueling and painful, is unmatched. You can't microwave spiritual formation. I wish you could.
Yeah.
But you can't. It's the long obedience in the same direction. It's the putting yourself in a place every day where you're surrendered and you're saying, God, here's my messy life. Here's all of my messy shadow sides. Like, please meet me in it. Show me what to do today. Brooke's laughing.
If you can't tell, this is exactly where we're at today.
Right now, today.
This is our lived experience.
Romans 8, the verse we all love to quote part of, for we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. We love that part, right? But then you keep going. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And I've got a quote here. I quoted this at the retreat, but Megan Fate Marshman, who's been on the podcast, go listen to it. Go listen to anywhere she ever speaks. She's incredible. But she talks about this in her book, Meant for Good. And she said, God's plan for us is to form us more into the likeness of Jesus so that we can do what Jesus did. The good God has for you is to transform you into the image of his son so that you can partner with him in the restoration of all things. His plans for our lives are so much bigger and better than ours. And I think that's...
So the good that we've interpreted as health, wealth, success,
up and to the right,
hunky-dory, is not the good that Jesus is talking about there.
His good is to transform us. We're usually transformed by things that don't go well in our life, not everything that goes according to plan, so that we can image him to the world. Like that's what his good in our life is for. And I think that's what we can say in our own lived experience.
In life, there's just a deep time of waiting, and that's really normal. So I just would love to encourage anybody who's on any of the cultural bandwagons that everything needs to go really fast and that the waiting is a waste. Your waiting is not a waste. It is actually a win, to use all the W's. It's actually a huge win, because if you don't wait, you try. If you don't wait, you waste. Like, that's the truth. If you just another W, come on, please. I can't believe where all these are coming from.
You already told him you had a background in pastoral ministry.
Yeah, it's okay. Now all of the alliteration. But I think that's really true, that you can, like, your waiting can be a huge win or it can be a huge waste. It really depends on how you use the time. And that's the weirdest part, is I wish God would like force us to make it a win, but he doesn't. Yeah. He says you can literally waste this time and you can literally feel sorry for yourself. Self-pity is a big deal. Yeah. I don't struggle with that. Some people I'm close to do.
Hey.
I'm not saying you. I just said people I'm close to. You're not the only person I'm close to.
That's okay. I do. I'll admit it.
But self-pity is like it's a sneaky thing. It's really sneaky. And
it sometimes comes out as anger and irritability.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but if you're living in a place of self-pity, as an example, like, well, you're wasting your time. Yeah. And it's not productive. It's actually really harmful for you and everyone else. And there's permission to have really hard days, hard weeks, hard months. We get it. But I think there's also times when you have to actually step into that and make the waiting a huge win. And I think we do that by pressing into asking God what he's doing and embracing these moments. And so some mountains a lot of them are waiting. The second one, let's go to the second one, because I know we have a lot to say on all these. There's a time to turn. Yeah. What verse is that? What part is that?
That is verse 7, turn and set out on your journey. But there's a turning before you actually set out. And you're turning from where you were. And sometimes turning from an attitude, and you're turning to the journey that God now begins to open up before you. Because we want to live led. Yes. Followers of Jesus, we live led. We don't live by our own initiative. We wait for the leading of the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Yeah. The turning is really interesting, because I'm just thinking of, where would you say that was in that story that we shared? The turning.
I mean, maybe 2 points of like the recognizing we thought we were going one way and that was not God was way. Taking us some, but there was an unknown in that. Like, I don't know where we're turning to. I just know we're turning. Yes. And then I think of our move here to Bend. That was a big, like, maybe I can, what are the other two? Maybe that wouldn't fit into the turning one. Maybe it'd be better
a time to set out on the journey. Yeah. And a time to take possession.
You just gave them all away.
But I gave them all away. No, so maybe I think in the turning, of real, like the prayers of relinquishment, the surrender of like, okay, God, I'm open to where else.
Yes. So there's some
What else you might
faith
be doing.
required in that spot.
Yeah, I think sometimes we stay headed in a direction for a long time, so fixed on this outcome that we get deceived into thinking like, well, it's just around the corner, and it's just if I just do this a little more, and I just do this a little more, where sometimes God might want to say, hey, but are you open to something different? I think that's maybe the piece there is like, are we open to something different? Are we living open-handed? In the moment, God has us in, but open-handed to surrendered futures or surrendered outcomes, you know?
Yeah, the time to turn is really interesting because I think that's a really tricky moment because it's hard to know. Like, for example, I'm thinking of those that have suffered catastrophic loss. I'm thinking of people who have lost little ones and the countless stories we hear of stillborn babies. I mean, the saddest things that we can even think of this side of heaven. In one sense, you want to tell that grieving mother, you go as long as you need to grieve, as long as you need to grieve. And I would say, of course, right? But inevitably, there's going to be a time that none of us can determine that are sitting here on a podcast. There's going to be a time that the Spirit invites you to turn, not because you're going to forget that little one's beauty, not because it's time to turn and pretend that didn't happen, or turn and act like everything is fine now. And that
turning does not mean the end of grief.
Yes. No, turning is that great way to say it. Turning does not mean the end of grief, but turning to actually allow that painful tragedy to actually have a certain level of beauty in your life. And I know that might even sound violating for some hearing, like, how can this thing that and for some you might be listening and it's so raw. So you're not even listening to what I'm saying. And I understand. But I would also say there's going to be a moment where God invites you to turn, and it will be at your pace, and it will be probably before you want to, and it might feel different than you'd hope. But there's an invitation there, and the invitation is so that He can use this moment of pain and redeem it in a beautiful way to make your pain count. I know with Birdie, that was our prayer. It's like, Lord, please don't waste this pain. This pain is so bad. It's so hard. Just please don't waste it. Let us like at least help someone. I remember just like one person. Can we help just anybody with this pain? Because if not, it just feels like a waste. Like, what did this happen for? Like, God, please redeem it. So I think there's going to be times to turn, and we're invited into them. And there's going to be a time to turn from the grief looking the way that it did originally or initially. And whenever that happens.
Or I'm thinking too of like the husband who is giving his all to his career to provide for his family, which is a noble thing. But how often do you hear the story of, yes, I was super successful, but my wife and kids were dying at home. And my wife was saying, I don't care about the money. I don't care. Like, I just want you around and present. And so I think there's invitation there maybe for men, if that, and this applies to women too, but I think maybe more often with men, I don't know, where there might be moments where even the path that you're on seems really good. Like it's not that's not a bad thing. But when it's at the expense of your family, there might be invitation there for God to be like, hey, are you willing to turn and go down a different path for the sake of your family? In a culture that says, no, you can have both. But really, it's difficult to have both.
I like the way you guys are both using the word invitations because I think that's inherent. And this is an invitation that God is giving to His people right here. He's saying He really wants them. He's urging them strongly. But I think more often than not, He issues invitations, but to decline those and to say not to have the faith or the trust to follow Him in that isn't usually going to land us in a not flourishing place, at the very least.
Yes.
So, but it does take a degree of faith. Like I'm thinking of, you're talking about the woman grieving, deeply grieving, who at some point does need, for the sake of the rest of her family or the sake of life, needs to turn. That is really rough. And I think some of that grieving that we've talked about, that lament, you'll take with you into every stage of your life. It's not like you're saying, okay, I'm fine now.
No, no.
I have other kids. I'm okay. But it's maybe that you're turning and you're going on the journey carrying an extra backpack of sorrow with you every step of the way.
And maybe just to highlight for those that are listening, maybe just one observation is turning. There's activity in each of these. Like there's a time to wait. Again, there's like stuff that happens. You're not like passively.
Passive,
It's an active waiting. When it's turn, it's active. Some of you might ask, well, what's the activity? We kind of already mentioned it, but I would just encourage you as own lived experience. I think prayer is one of those amazing activities that we enter into that helps us lament, grieve, talk with God, pray into the future. It gives us hope. It gives lots of stuff. And in a culture where everyone's trying to become a celebrity, I don't know how to become a celebrity, but I do know how to become a saint. And the reason I know that is because there's a clear path biblically written out, and Jesus shows us that, and so many examples of old do. So many of us are running after celebrity, but God really invites us to be saints, and there's a way to become that, and the way really is through prayer. Ronald Rolheiser, a favorite, he just says this, in my experience, the extraordinary people I have known and admired. We all want to know and admire people, right? We want to be those, I think all of us in some way want to be known and admired. But he says, all the people, extraordinary people I have known and admired, all had the same secret. They prayed privately.
Yeah.
And I think that's the truth, is that you are not passively doing this. You're actively entering into the waiting and to the turning, which leads us to the third one. There's a time to set out. Do you want to read that verse, Diane?
Verse 7 again, turn and set out on your journey. It's like pack up and go now, you know. And usually it's a journey into the unknown. That is such a biblical motif through Scripture, starting with Abraham, right? We were both talking about, what is that verse, you know?
Where he says, go to a land that I will show you.
Yes.
Where he has him just look out over this vast land. Says, you're going to go. Basically, trust me, I'm going to give you all these wonderful things. Yeah. But I'm not going to tell you where you're going. You're just supposed to start going.
Can you imagine the conversation with his wife?
I'm kidding.
We're going. We have no idea
idea where. God just said go.
Yes.
And that seems to be the way. And then he does it again to the freshly set free Israelites. He does the same thing. You're setting off on a journey. I'm not telling you where. So it's so often into the unknown, unpredictable kind of future. Like
the turn.
You know, when you started doing just part-time with Intentional.
I remember.
You know, you had no idea. Intentional was basically just a conference ministry. We went to churches all over the place.
It was just you and Phil. You were the only employees.
Yes.
I think Phil was the only employee, and then you just did events.
Yes.
You would like at first, right?
Yes. At first, I just did events, and then finally, several years in, I started getting paid. You know, that's typical.
Classic ministry
but
stuff.
I mean, that's kind of normal in following the way of Jesus. You know, it's not sign the big contract. It's usually a journey into the unknown, unexpected.
The secret way.
And for at least for Phil and I, in our experience, there's usually sacrifice required from us. It's like maybe because God knows that we, you know, grew up in the entitled American dream kind of a sense, and so He requires sacrifice so that we just really follow instead of just gimme.
Well,
But for us, it seems to always be part of the story. Okay, what are we going to have to sacrifice this time, or lay down? You know.
It costs something. I think you're saying it costs something.
I think it costs something.
Yeah. I was thinking of Psalm 55, the Jewish days from sundown to sundown. So when you read the scriptures, sometimes you'll read like these phrases, but it starts at night.
Yes.
And so, but Psalm 55, I think, just highlights this in a beautiful way. Again, if you're wondering, what do I do? Like if you're a person who's like, I'm listening to this, I'm like, great, but what do I do? Again, it's going to come back to prayer. But I just want to give you a fair warning. But I think Psalm 55 is really helpful. It says every evening, remember, starts sundown to sundown. Every evening, that's when your day starts technically, I will explain my need to him. So every night when you have a moment to breathe, you're explaining your need to him. What are your needs? Like, tell him. Like, I love this. It's just tell your needs. Tell him your needs. Every morning, I will move my soul towards him. So every evening, I'm going to explain my need. Every morning, no matter how tired, no matter how out of it you are, you're going to just move your soul towards him as much as you can. And every waking hour, that's all the stuff in between, I'll worship only him.
Yeah.
So again, is like, how do we fill our times? I think we fill our times with the invitation that God is giving us, which is to focus on him and let this pain transform us to become more like him, to look to him. This is that stuff when people hit their rock bottom. I have a friend who has a podcast, and he just started it. It's going extremely well. And he just had this guy on who was a prisoner, and the clips went viral. And it was basically this prisoner who's just saying, yeah, I really need Jesus. It's really easy to see your need for Jesus when you're in prison. Like everything's terrible. And when you find Jesus, when all that other noise is taken away, you get to feel your need for Jesus in this beautiful way. And the interview or the clip is just him telling people that. But I think so many folks, so many of us that are even listening right now, we don't always feel our need for him. But these moments of pain, these moments of frustration, they actually are, without us having to go to prison, are moments of like where things are stripped away so we can see enough that actually our soul desperately needs him. And if you can actually lean into that, when these things change or come back, or if they never come back, you can actually experience satisfaction this side of life. And I don't mean happiness all the time on worldly terms. I mean deep peace and satisfaction in him, which is different. So there's a time to turn.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that, ladies, before we go to the last one?
We were already on the, we already did time to turn. We're on the climb the mountain one. Or
We don't know what we're talking. I don't know what we're talking about.
Here's the thing. I think all four of these have inherent dangers in them. And the turning, I think, is when we stay stuck. And we get comfortable where we're stuck, and we're scared to turn, and we're scared to set out on the journey. Because
that's good.
We don't know where we're going. God's not very generous about telling us that.
Fear.
You know, I just laugh when people ask me to pray for them to have clarity, because I think that just doesn't seem to be on his agenda for most of us. He wants to lead us one step at a time, because I think by clarity we think, give me the plan. Just give me the master plan. I will follow it perfectly. And that is not the way he deals with his people. He wants us to depend on him and to entrust ourselves to him. And he knows that our independence wants us to just have it all lined out for us. But sometimes we stay stuck, and everybody around you tends to know when you're stuck, except you.
Everyone can very quickly say, oh, you look very stuck. You're right. I appreciate you saying that, because depending upon your personality, for me, I don't naturally operate from a place of fear. Now, I can be fearful just like anybody about certain things and dynamics, but I don't necessarily make decisions based off of fear. So I move towards things. I have an aggressive posture, as Elizabeth could tell you. I move towards problems and towards situations to solve them.
Yeah.
That's how I operate.
Yours are not usually sins of omission. Or sins of commission.
Oh, yeah, they're direct. She's laughing.
No comment.
No comment. Yeah, they're obvious. Which is easy for someone that maybe has sins of omission to hide behind, which is another.
You bet.
Which is a little tricky dynamic sometimes.
No, but what you're highlighting is good, because for some people, the first two, the waiting and maybe turning and being open to something else, is super hard.
Yes.
Because it feels much better, because they don't know where they're going, to just wait.
To stay.
For others, the waiting and not knowing is like torment.
Yes.
And so I think that you're onto something there. And then for some, the conquering the mountain is the easier thing to do. I'd say for you, that's the easier thing to do.
Right.
Like, that's more fun, that's more exciting, that's more we're getting somewhere.
Sure. Yeah.
And for others, that's terrifying, because I want to know where I'm going and I want to know the full plan. And I think that's important to highlight. And God knows that. He made us all uniquely different.
Yes.
And he's with us in all of those seasons,
and
whatever he might be asking you to do.
Yes.
Yeah. And usually we're looking for some like deep, deep peace, some deep clarity, some deep, like, it's written in the skies, now is the time to act. And usually usually it's through prayers and not even always praying the same prayers over and over again. Like where God has had me recently is just shifting from the prayers that I've prayed for a long time that feels like, that doesn't feel like there's a lot of answer there. Or like for example, I'm currently just in a time, I want to stop saying season because it doesn't feel like a season, where it just feels like there's way too much happening. It just feels like it's way more than one person can do. And in the past, I would have always approached prayer in those seasons of like, God, just show me what I'm supposed to take off my plate. Show me what is not mine to do. I think those are all really great prayers. But lately, those prayers
when you've done all that, and it's still
they don't feel
overwhelming.
like they apply in this current reality of what is happening. And so my prayers are shifting to, God, if there's anything I'm not supposed to be doing, will you please show me? Waiting there.
Okay.
When he's not made anything clear, now my prayer each morning is, God, would you just somehow give me the strength and the ability and the grace to be able to do it today?
Yeah.
Because this does feel like way too much, but yet I don't feel released from anything you're asking me to do. And I don't like who I am currently being in the midst of all of this. So would you just give me the grace to do it today? Give me the grace to do it this morning, the creativity to know how to make all of this work. Yeah. And if you want to release me from something, show me, but I'll be obedient to do what you want me to do today. I'm in the beginning stages of learning to pray that way, but I think sometimes it's being open to praying differently. And maybe more that whole idea of God gives you the desires of your heart. I think so often it's that he actually changes the desires that are in our heart to be more in line with his.
Yes.
And then he really is giving us the desires that we've had, but in his way and through his strength, not our own.
Well, and sometimes God wants to change us through his presence, meaning you're going to be asking and asking and asking these things, but sometimes he's going to actually just change you over time by being in his presence. I can't remember which writer wrote about it, but it was, he said something along the lines like, I want to experience God's presence like a fig tree undergoes summer. It just experiences it. It's that idea that like if a fig tree is in the right place at the right time and the season comes, well, what happens? Well, it goes from like just twigs to the most beautiful plant. It just experiences it. And when you're in God's presence, sometimes it's through active prayer. Sometimes it's just through sitting, being quiet. You want to experience God's presence like a fig tree undergoes summer. It just experiences it. It just changes because it's in his presence. So sometimes it's the active prayers and sometimes it's just sitting there. He changes you in ways that you cannot ever actively think of. And so lastly, and we'll be done, a time to take possession. There's a time that we take possession and a time when we say, okay, God, this is ours with you, and we're going to step into this new situation. I mean, fill in the blank for yourself wherever you're listening, and please listen to this story, but use the examples and the principles. Our story is just ours, right? Like we're just sharing to hopefully give some context to wherever you find yourself in this, that there's going to be a time to take possession to the new life, to the new perspective, to the new hope, to the new job for some, for the new freedom to be able to say like, I don't have to live under the pressure of the world or what the world is putting on me to be everything to everybody all the time. You don't have to live under that pressure. You know, some of you are going to take possession of that you get to take possession of new freedom. So wherever you're at, I just want to encourage you to remember that possession can look so different depending upon your story.
Yeah. I would add one thing. So mostly we speak to parents. Like, what did you say? Our reach is mostly 20s and 30s up to 40.
Yeah.
But there is a stage of life that I'm in right now, where most of my friends are retiring. They've had their path set before them.
Yeah.
I think that all of us as followers of Jesus need to even right in that place, wait before God and say, what would you have me in this? When maybe an income is not necessary, but it is the standard going and playing all the games that I like to play or traveling the world. Is that your plan for me? Is that your great pleasure for me? Or is there another mission ahead of you? And I'm finding more and more grandparents and retirees are finding a whole nother journey and a whole nother land to possess. And it just, I think that goes with that American mindset. Oh no, this is the way you're supposed to do it. You're too old to do anything else or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge before us at this age is to continue to be listening and to be living led into what God might have for you.
Yes. So there's a time to turn or wait, excuse me. There's a time to turn. There's a time to set out. There's a time to take possession. And wherever you're at on your journey, we just want to encourage you to wait and to actually turn and to actually set out and to actually take possession as God's leading you. And I know that, we're trying today, especially in this episode, we are not trying to be prescriptive. Like, if you do these 4 things, you're going to be great. What we just offered you was hopefully a framework to process all the pain of your life. And truly, I think some of the best gifts Elizabeth and I have ever gotten, and I'm sure you and Phil as well, Diane, is when people help you make sense of the craziness of how life works, what to actually expect in God's kingdom or his ways rather than our own. And even though it might not be what we had thought or hoped, I actually think it gives us such hope because you can actually begin to start the journey, as we're talking about, up whatever mountain or in and around whatever place you're in. You can actually start in a healthy way. So, ladies, thank you for your wisdom today. Thank you for this conversation. And tune in next week. We'll be back with another episode.